It must be the season for big ideas, because CPAC will be followed next weekend by the Samuel Griffith Society Conference in Melbourne. And I'm so pleased to be joined now by one of the speakers of at that event, Victorian Silk, Stuart Wood of King's Council. Stuart, welcome to the program. Your paper for the Samuel Griffith Society Conference next weekend is about the lessons for Australia to take from the experience of the 1967 referendum. Tell us a bit about that and what it is that our political leaders should be learning from this chapter in our history.
Well, thanks, Amanda. I think there are some great lessons to be learned from the 1967 referendum. A bit of the problem is, though, that it's all covered in myth. There's a myth that the 1967 referendum gave Aboriginals the vote. It's the myth that it gave them citizenship. There's a myth that they weren't counted in the census before 1967. 1967 didn't have anything to do with those things. It was about making a slight change to a piece of constitutional apparatus that dealt with the way in which the states, the seats in the House of Reps were divided within the states. And more importantly, the second aspect of it was to give the Commonwealth control over Aboriginal affairs. And it's that aspect that we should learn about, because it was a significant political and societal achievement by the people who pushed for a long time, for decades, to give the Commonwealth control over Aboriginal affairs. And it means that the Commonwealth has...
Sorry.
Sorry, no, I cut you off.
No, I beg your pardon, time delay there. It's really interesting because there is a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding of our history when it comes to the way Aboriginal people have been treated and understood in the period before 1967. Even our own minister at the federal level dealing with matters of Indigenous policy, Linda Burney, got so many of these facts wrong, even in her maiden speech. What are we to expect from our political leaders when they don't have a clear enough appreciation of the history of 1967 and beyond?
Well, one of the myths that was put around by the minister was that she was counted under the Flora and Fauna Act. She wasn't counted under the Flora and Fauna Act. There was no Flora and Fauna Act that counted Aboriginals. So if you don't have a good understanding of the history of what was done in the 1967 referendum and the powers the Commonwealth has, it's a very poor base from which to then move and argue for additional constitutional power. To put it another way, constitutional power was perfected in 1967 in relation to Aboriginal affairs. We've had a dozen or so consultative bodies that have been created by governments of both persuasions since 1967, based on the power the Commonwealth was given by the amendments made in the 1967 referendum. I mean, you could legislate now for a voice based on the fact that the Commonwealth has power to do what it likes in relation to Aboriginal affairs. So because the history's so misunderstood, some of it accidentally, some of it deliberately, there's a lack of understanding that the Commonwealth has the constitutional power to do that which it could do, if it wanted to implement the voice legislatively. And if there's power to do something in the Constitution, you don't change. I mean, it's a power-sharing document. It just sets out various ways in which power is shared between the executive, the parliament and the judiciary, and to an extent the Crown, and also the way power is shared between the states and the Commonwealth. Now, if the Commonwealth has got power already because of the reforms or the amendments in 1967 to do whatever it likes in terms of setting up a consultative body for Aboriginal people, what are we having a constitutional amendment to do that which the 1967 amendment did?
Yeah, quite right. So what are the lessons that we need to take away and apply as a nation as we consider the current referendum that's before us?
Well, I think that the first lesson is to appreciate that this is a constitutional amendment. This is an amendment to a foundational document of our democracy. and you only amend that when there's a need to do it. There was a campaign that stretched, as I've said, for many decades, involving very many people from different persuasions that enabled the people to vote almost uniformly, at 90%, in favour of giving the Commonwealth control over Aboriginal affairs. Now, that's something that should be celebrated on in effect, a bipartisan manner, because it was started by the Labor Party but finished by the Liberal Party. And that power, despite the fact that it obviously hasn't been used as effectively as people might like, is one that the Commonwealth has now and has had since 1967 and continues to have, and can be used to do whatever it likes in this field. So the lesson is, don't just change the Constitution because it seems like a good idea. Change the Constitution if there's a deficiency. And there's no deficiency in terms of the Commonwealth's power to do what it likes in relation to Aboriginal affairs.
It's a really good point. Stuart Wood, thank you very much for your expertise tonight. I'll look forward to hearing the whole of your paper at the Samuel Griffith Society's meeting next weekend.